In the vast, silent theater of space, we have always considered ourselves the sole audience, gazing out at a performance of predictable physical laws. We believed we understood the script: gravity, motion, cause, and effect. But what if I told you that today, the script was torn apart, the stage lights shattered, and a new actor has just stepped from the shadows? In the next hour, I will take you on a journey through the most terrifying and profound 24 hours in human history. We will witness an object from beyond our solar system defy every law of physics we hold dear. We'll track its impossible acceleration, decode its mechanical heartbeat, and watch as it transforms and splits with surgical precision. We will follow one half as it vanishes from existence, only to be summoned back by its twin. And finally, we will watch as these two pieces begin a final ominous alignment, a planetary scale maneuver with Earth as its focus. This is the story of 3I Atlas, an event that has forced us to ask not if we are alone, but whether we have been naive children playing in the backyard of something ancient, intelligent, and now very, very awake. It began as a whisper in the cold digital halls of our observatories. An object, designated 3I Atlas, had been on our watch lists for months. It was classified as an interstellar interloper, a rogue comet or asteroid flung from some distant unknown star system, destined for a brief, gravitational hello and goodbye with our sun before continuing its journey into the void. We've seen such visitors before. Oumuamua and Borisov were our first confirmed guests from beyond the veil. They were fascinating, certainly, but they played by the rules. They tumbled, they outgassed, they followed the elegant, predictable curves dictated by gravity. 3I Atlas, for a time, did the same. It was a comfort, a reaffirmation that the universe, while vast, was ultimately knowable. Then, just 11 hours ago, that comfort was annihilated. The event wasn't violent. There was no cataclysmic explosion, no brilliant flash of light that you might expect from a celestial body giving up the ghost. Comets, you see, are fragile things. They are essentially dirty snowballs, loose conglomerates of ice, dust, and rock. Under the immense tidal stresses of swinging past a star, they break apart. They crumble, they fracture, they disintegrate into a messy, chaotic cloud of debris. It's the natural, expected end for such an object. Think of it like dropping a piece of chalk on the ground. It shatters into countless, irregular pieces. That is nature. But what happened to 3I Atlas was not nature. On screens in control rooms from the Atacama Desert in Chile to the dormant volcanoes of Hawaii, the object simply divided. It split into two perfect, geometrically identical halves. The line of separation was so clean, so impossibly precise, it looked less like a fracture and more like a surgical incision. There was no debris field, not a single stray pebble or cloud of dust. It was as if a cosmic scalpel, guided by an unseen hand, had cleaved it in two. This single act defied every known principle of fracture mechanics and astrophysics. An object the size of a mountain, subjected to unimaginable forces, should have been pulverized. Instead, it behaved as if it were made of something else entirely, something designed to come apart this way. It was the first clue that we were not looking at a rock. We were looking at a machine. The sheer impossibility of this perfect split sent an immediate shockwave through the global astronomical community. Urgent, encrypted communications flew between NASA, the European Space Agency, ESA, and Roscosmos. Every powerful telescope on and off the planet was immediately redirected to stare at this anomaly. But the universe wasn't done with us. In the minutes that followed the division, the unthinkable happened. One of the halves, which we designated Object B, simply vanished. Now, when we say vanished, it's crucial to understand what that means. We don't mean it flew behind a planet or was obscured by the sun's glare. We don't mean it became too faint to see. Humanity has built a planetary defense network capable of tracking a wrench floating in orbit. Our deep space radar can detect objects the size of a car millions of miles away. The new James Webb Space Telescope can see the faint infrared glow of the universe's first galaxies. We can see everything. Yet Object B disappeared from all of it, simultaneously. Optical telescopes saw nothing. Infrared arrays went cold. Radio dishes heard only the background hiss of the cosmos. It didn't fade away. It was there 1 millisecond and gone the next, as if it had been deleted from reality itself. This is a violation of the most fundamental law of physics, the conservation of mass and energy. Things don't just cease to exist. They have to go somewhere. But Object B left no trace. No gravitational wake, no faint energy signature, no clue as to its fate or destination. It was an act of cosmic magic, a trick performed on a scale that our science has no framework to comprehend. It's like watching a magician make a coin disappear, except the coin is a mountain, and the stage is our solar system. And then, from the profound and terrifying silence, came the signal. The remaining half, Object A, began to talk. It wasn't a random burst of radiation. It was a structured, repeating signal, broadcast with clear intention, aimed like an arrow straight at Earth. The initial analysis left scientists speechless. The signal wasn't a beacon. It felt more like a declaration. This wasn't a natural event. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated, deliberate act. And the scariest part, the part that keeps every astronomer on Earth awake tonight, is the realization that this perfectly executed maneuver, the split, the disappearance, the signal, feels like the opening move in a game we never even knew we were playing. We thought we were just watching a comet. But the comet, it seems, was watching us back. What do you do when the rock you re-studying suddenly reveals it has a mind of its own? And what does it want to say? To truly grasp the chilling implications of the split, we have to rewind the clock by 48 hours. Before the impossible division, before the vanishing act, 3I Atlas performed its first miracle, a miracle of motion. For weeks, its trajectory had been perfectly mapped. Every observatory agreed on its path, its velocity, its gentle deceleration as it swung past the sun and began its long climb out of our solar system's gravitational well. This is Celestial Mechanics 101. An object moving away from a source of gravity, like a ball thrown into the air, must slow down. The sun's immense pull acts like a tether, constantly tugging it back. There are no exceptions to this rule. It is as fundamental as cause and effect. Everything was normal until it wasn't. Without any warning, 3I Atlas began to accelerate. And this wasn't a minor, barely detectable change that could be dismissed as a measurement error or the effect of solar wind. This was a flagrant, undeniable, and exponential increase in velocity. It was accelerating away from the sun, in direct defiance of gravity. Imagine throwing a ball into the air, and instead of slowing down and falling back, it suddenly shoots upward, faster and faster, as if an invisible rocket engine just ignited. That's what we were witnessing. The data poured in from the global network of telescopes, and it painted a picture of utter physical heresy. The teams at Caltech and Harvard ran the numbers again and again, convinced there had to be a mistake. Their first assumption was a natural explanation. Comets can exhibit a small amount of acceleration through a process called outgassing. As the sun heats a comet's icy surface, jets of gas can erupt, acting like tiny, natural thrusters. But this phenomenon leaves a clear signature. It creates a visible coma, a glowing halo of gas and dust, and a tail. It's also chaotic and unpredictable. 3I Atlas had no coma. It had no tail. There was no spectral evidence of any ejected material. It was accelerating in absolute pristine silence. So the scientists dug deeper. They built complex models to account for every conceivable natural force. Could it be the subtle push of solar radiation pressure? No, the object was far too massive for that to have such a dramatic effect. Could it be an interaction with the interplanetary magnetic field? The math didn't work. The force generated would be orders of magnitude too weak. They even simulated the gravitational pull of a hypothetical, undiscovered Planet 9 lurking in the outer solar system, but no configuration could explain the object's precise, controlled burn. Every single model led to the same dead end. There was no known natural explanation for what they were seeing. The data was unequivocal. 3I Atlas was accelerating under its own power. This is the moment when the quiet concern in the scientific community began to curdle into genuine fear. The implications are profound. An object that can propel itself is not a comet. It's a vehicle. An object that can overcome the gravitational pull of a star without any visible means of propulsion is utilizing a technology so advanced it borders on magic. We use brute force, burning massive amounts of chemical fuel to create a reactive thrust. It's messy, inefficient, and loud. This was silent, invisible, and perfectly efficient. This stealth drive, as some technicians began to call it in hushed tones, suggested an intelligence that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe in a way we can only dream of. It forced us to confront a possibility that had, until now, been the exclusive domain of science fiction. We were not observing a random piece of celestial debris. We were tracking an interstellar probe, a scout ship, perhaps even something more. The calculated, deliberate nature of the acceleration, followed by the perfect split and disappearance, painted a terrifyingly coherent picture. This was not a series of random anomalies. This was a sequence of events, a procedure. The initial stability was its camouflage, the acceleration was its repositioning, and the split. The split was the beginning of its true mission. The realization dawned on us with cold certainty. This object hadn't just stumbled into our solar system by chance, it had come here on purpose. And a being capable of building such a ship would not make that journey for trivial reasons. The question that hung heavy in every control room was no longer, "What is it?" but "Why is it here?" As if the impossible acceleration wasn't enough to shatter our understanding of the cosmos, 3I Atlas had another secret to reveal. 36 hours before it divided, a new and even more perplexing phenomenon began. From the very core of the object, it began to emit pulses of energy. This wasn't the chaotic crackle of natural radiation or the random bursts from a dying star. These were perfectly formed, incredibly stable pulses, repeating with the metronomic precision of an atomic clock. Exactly every 11 minutes, a new pulse was sent out, measured to nanosecond accuracy. To put this in perspective, the most regular objects we know of in the universe are pulsars, the rapidly spinning remnants of massive stars. They are our cosmic timekeepers. Yet even they experience tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuations over time, known as timing noise. Their rotations gradually slow down. But the signal from 3I Atlas was different. It was absolutely mathematically perfect. It had zero statistical deviation. It wasn't like a natural phenomenon. It was like a digital signal, a heartbeat, a code. This discovery ignited a fierce debate within the scientific community. One camp argued for a novel physical phenomenon, some unknown form of resonant energy reaction happening deep within the object's core. Perhaps, they theorized, we were witnessing a new law of physics. But the other camp, comprised of experts in signal processing and quantum energy, pointed to a more unsettling conclusion. This level of precision wasn't natural. It was artificial. Nature is filled with beautiful patterns, but it is also filled with slight imperfections. Perfection, especially on a repeating mathematical basis, is almost always a hallmark of intelligence. Think of the difference between the jagged, natural edge of a broken rock and the perfectly straight edge of a cut diamond. One is nature, the other is design. When they analyzed the waveform of the pulses, the similarities to our own artificial signals were striking. The patterns followed a clear mathematical structure, a repeating cycle that seemed almost like a language. It was a beacon, announcing its presence not with a chaotic shout, but with a calm, deliberate, and undeniably intelligent rhythm. For the first time, we were forced to consider that we weren't just observing an object, we were being addressed. Then, as the world's scientists were still grappling with the meaning of this cosmic heartbeat, the object began to change. 18 hours before the split, under the unblinking gaze of every major observatory, 3I Atlas started to transform. At first, the changes were subtle, registered only as slight shifts in the light curves and spectral data. But within 2 hours, the transformation was undeniable and breathtaking. The object, a colossal mass thousands of feet in diameter, was reshaping itself. The roughly spherical shape began to elongate, to smooth out, to reform. It was morphing from a natural-looking celestial body into a perfect, symmetrical cylinder. This is, simply put, physically impossible. No known material, rock, ice, or any metal alloy we can conceive of, could withstand the immense internal stresses of such a rapid and radical restructuring. The sheer compressive and tensile forces should have torn it to shreds. A mountain does not simply decide to become a skyscraper, yet Atlas remained perfectly intact. Its surface didn't crack or melt. It flowed. The transformation was precise, geometric, and controlled. It was like watching a piece of advanced machinery unfolding, preparing itself for a pre-programmed mission. And then, at the precise moment the transformation into a perfect cylinder was complete, the 11-minute energy pulses stopped. The heartbeat ceased. All emissions, all radiation, all energy waves. Gone. Absolute silence. It was as if a machine had completed its startup sequence and was now entering a new mode of operation. Stealth. This eerie quiet fell over the entire observation network. In control rooms across the globe, scientists could only stare at their blank monitors, the silence on their screens reflecting the stunned silence in the room. None of us knew what it meant. We had just witnessed an object demonstrate intelligent communication and then physically reconfigure itself in a way that violated the laws of solid-state physics. We didn't know it then, but this moment of quiet was the final deep breath before the plunge. It was the calm before the storm, a premonition of the event that was to come just hours later, an event that no one on Earth was prepared to witness. The 11 hours of silence were a period of intense, frantic speculation. Humanity's greatest minds worked in a state of suspended disbelief, analyzing the data from the impossible transformation, trying to predict what could possibly come next. They were not prepared for the answer. Exactly 11 hours after the transformation and the cessation of the heartbeat signal, 3I Atlas split. As we've discussed, it was a perfect clean division that created two identical halves, which we named Object A and Object B. For a few brief moments, they drifted apart in a controlled parallel formation, a picture of eerie, unnatural balance. And then the universe broke again. Object B, without any warning or preamble, executed a maneuver that defies the very concept of momentum and inertia. It made a perfect 90-degree turn. There was no gentle curve, no deceleration to change direction, no visible thrust. It simply changed its vector instantaneously. In the world of physics, this is not just impossible. It's nonsensical. An object in motion has inertia. To change its direction, a force must be applied over time. Think of trying to make a sharp turn in a speeding car. You feel the force pushing you to the side. The car has to slow down and follow a curve. Object B did it as easily as a cursor moving on a computer screen. In one frame of data, it was moving in one direction. In the next, it was moving at a right angle to that path. Immediately following this impossible turn, it accelerated to a velocity that shattered all known physical limits, for a macroscopic object. And then, it vanished. Gone. In 1 millisecond, it disappeared from every single detection system humanity possesses. NASA's Deep Space Network, a global system of antennas that can communicate with probes at the edge of the solar system, lost its lock instantly. The ESA confirmed the result. High-orbit military satellites designed to detect the faintest of signals recorded the same absolute cutoff. There was no afterglow, no residual energy, no gravitational ripple. It was as if it had been perfectly and surgically removed from our dimension. The control centers descended into a state of quiet chaos. The whispers started, theories so wild they would have been dismissed as insanity just a day earlier. Had Object B engaged a cloaking device, a technology that could bend light and all other forms of radiation around itself, rendering it completely invisible? Had it manipulated space-time itself, creating a localized wormhole to jump to another location instantly? Or had it, as some physicists dared to suggest, phased into another dimension, a parallel reality that coexists with our own but is normally inaccessible? These theories sound like pure science fiction, but when the data shows you something that is impossible according to the known rules, you are forced to consider rules you don't yet know. If Object B could truly hide itself so completely, then it was still out there, somewhere, silent and unseen. And a hidden observer is infinitely more terrifying than one you can see. For 4 agonizing hours, there was nothing. The world's observatories desperately scanned the empty patch of sky, hoping for a flicker, a signal, anything. And then, a new anomaly emerged, not from the void where B had disappeared, but from the half that remained. Object A, the twin that had stayed behind, began to speak again. It started as a faint whisper in the radio spectrum, almost lost in the background noise of the galaxy. But as the powerful computers at the Arecibo Observatory, in this narrative's timeline, filtered and amplified the signal, a pattern emerged that sent a fresh wave of shock through everyone watching. It was not random static. It was structured communication. A repeating sequence of tones, rising and falling with mathematical precision. When the ratios between the tones were analyzed, they formed a sequence identical to the prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, and so on. This is not a random choice. Prime numbers are the building blocks of mathematics, a universal concept that any intelligent, technological civilization would surely understand. It's the exact type of hello signal that we ourselves included on the golden record sent out with the Voyager probes. It's a way of saying, we are intelligent. We understand the universe in a logical, mathematical way. Except this time, we were not the ones sending the message. We were the recipients. For 31 minutes, the prime number signal continued, perfectly and purposefully. And it wasn't being broadcast omnidirectionally out into the cosmos. The signal was highly directional, a focused beam, and it was aimed at the exact coordinates in space where Object B had vanished. It wasn't a message to us. It was a summons, a command, a wake-up call. Object A was calling out to its missing twin. Then, precisely on the last pulse of the sequence, all transmissions stopped. Silence returned. But this time it was different. It felt like an answer was coming. And a few minutes later, our deep space sensors picked it up. A faint, subtle, but unmistakable gravitational ripple, emanating from a point nearly 2 astronomical units closer to Earth. Whatever had disappeared was not only still there, but it was on the move. It had answered the call. And now, it was coming for us. The detection of the gravitational ripple was a watershed moment. It confirmed the most terrifying of the hypotheses. Object B had not been destroyed, nor had it truly left our reality. It had simply hidden itself, and now it was back. The data from the ripple allowed us to triangulate its new position. It had reappeared, and it was moving at an incredible speed, on a trajectory that was unequivocally, terrifyingly aimed at Earth. At first, the orbital mechanics suggested a flyby, a close pass that would take it through the outer solar system. But as more data poured in, a more sinister pattern emerged. The object's trajectory wasn't a simple ballistic curve. It was making minute, precise adjustments. Tiny changes in its velocity vector, perfectly calculated to refine its course. These were not the random nudges of gravitational influence from other planets. This was active, intelligent course correction. All the data pointed to the same inescapable conclusion. The object wasn't just moving toward Earth, it was navigating. Behind the scenes, the official narrative was tightly controlled. NASA, the ESA, and other space agencies issued vague statements about a gravitational anomaly to prevent worldwide panic. But internally, the tone was one of grim certainty. In encrypted communications, later leaked by terrified insiders, all pretense of a natural phenomenon was dropped. The orbital patterns showed clear, undeniable signs of active control from an unknown intelligence. They were no longer tracking a comet fragment. They were tracking a vessel. The James Webb Space Telescope, with its unparalleled power, was tasked with getting a direct image. Using its adaptive optics to cancel out any atmospheric distortion, it focused on the target. The image that came back stunned the entire team into silence. They were expecting the rough, cratered, irregular surface of an asteroid. What they saw was something else entirely. The object was a perfect geometric shape, and its surface was smooth, faintly reflective, like polished liquid metal. There were no impact craters, no dust, no cracks, none of the natural geological features that accumulate on any object that has spent eons traveling through space. Its near-perfect reflectivity and symmetrical form suggested a purpose-built material, a manufactured hull. Then, as it neared the outer orbit of Jupiter, it did something that once again broke the laws of physics. It slowed down. Traveling at millions of miles per hour, it executed a smooth, steady, and perfect deceleration. There was no reverse thrust, no ejection of mass, no release of energy. It simply reduced its velocity, as if it had an internal, inertial dampening system. This is a feat of technology that is, to us, pure magic. For us to slow a spacecraft, we have to turn it around and fire its engines, a violent and fuel-intensive process. This object did it silently and effortlessly. From that moment on, a curtain of official silence fell across the globe. All scientific publications ceased. All press conferences were canceled. The flow of public information was cut off. The last report our team received, before being locked out of the official networks, was an encrypted message fragment broadcast from the Deep Space Network. The message was stark and chilling. Object B holding position. No further movement detected. Awaiting instructions. The message was unsigned and ended with a string of undecipherable characters. But the most terrifying part was the final phrase, repeated 3 times in the original transmission. Awaiting instructions. Awaiting instructions. Awaiting instructions. The message wasn't from us. It was a status update from the object itself, or whatever was controlling it. It had reached its designated position. It had stopped. And now, it was waiting. The question that froze the blood in our veins was simple. Waiting for what? Or more terrifyingly, waiting for whom? For nearly 6 hours, the solar system held its breath. Object B, the sleek, metallic half of the original Atlas, remained perfectly motionless in the dark gulf of space near Jupiter's orbit. It emitted nothing. No light, no heat, no radio waves. The silence was absolute, and in that silence, the tension on Earth became unbearable. It felt less like a pause and more like the moment a predator freezes before it strikes. Then, at exactly 03 UTC, everything changed. Every major radio telescope on the planet, from the high-altitude dishes of the Atacama Array to the sprawling Very Large Array in New Mexico, was simultaneously hit by a massive burst of electromagnetic energy. It was not the chaotic roar of a solar flare or the distant cry of a nebula. This was a perfectly focused, synchronized beam, and its point of origin was undeniable. 3I Atlas b. The object that had been silent for hours had roared to life. It began broadcasting intense pulses across a huge range of the electromagnetic spectrum. Gamma rays, powerful radio waves, X-rays, all were arranged in a pattern of staggering complexity. At first glance, the data looked like pure chaos, a jumble of frequencies and waveforms. But when scientists fed the raw data into a spectrometer and decoded the patterns, a chilling discovery emerged. The waveforms were not random noise. They contained highly structured, symmetrical patterns. They looked like blueprints, diagrams, schematics. The pulses weren't just a signal. They were data. They were instructions. The most haunting discovery was the signal's target. It wasn't being beamed out into deep space, toward some distant home world. It was aimed directly, precisely, at Earth. Within minutes of the transmission starting, strange things began to happen in our planet's orbit. Several commercial communications satellites suddenly went dead. A military weather satellite stopped transmitting. At first, these were dismissed as coincidences. Space is a harsh environment. Satellites fail. But the timing was too perfect. Each satellite failure occurred at the exact moment the focused energy beam from Object B would have intersected its orbit. It was as if the signal was a key, and these satellites were locks. It became terrifyingly clear that Object B wasn't just sending a message. It was activating something. Something that was already here, lying dormant in our infrastructure, waiting for a wake-up call. NASA and the world's military commands went into a panic, immediately taking sensitive systems offline and rerouting telescope access to classified networks. But a few independent astronomers and amateur radio operators kept their own systems running long enough to record one final, crucial detail. While Object B was broadcasting its complex instructions from its position near Jupiter, its twin, Object A, which had remained in its original position outside the orbit of Mars, had also begun to change. It started to glow. A deep, steady, internal light began to flicker beneath its surface. And the flickers were not random. They were pulsing in perfect synchronized rhythm with the signals being sent by its twin. One half was sending. The other half was receiving. They were communicating with each other across hundreds of millions of miles of empty space. And together, as one sent its activation code to Earth and the other received its own set of instructions, they were just beginning to wake up. We were no longer just observers of an anomaly. We were the subject of it. The experiment had begun. In the last 12 hours, the true terrifying scope of the Atlas event has begun to reveal itself. Both halves of the object have started moving again. But this is not the random drift of celestial bodies. This is the precise, coordinated movement of a machine being assembled. Object A, the glowing half near Mars, has begun to rotate, slowly and purposefully, on a fixed axis. Simultaneously, hundreds of millions of miles away, Object B near Jupiter is mirroring that movement perfectly. Every degree of rotation, every fractional change in angular velocity is an exact match. It is as if the two objects, separated by a vast expanse of space, are physically connected by an invisible rod. They are two parts of a single system, and they are locking into place. Astronomers, working frantically on private networks, projected the rotational axes of both objects forward. The lines did not converge on a random point in deep space or on the Sun. Both axes were converging on a single, horrifying focal point: the orbital path of the planet Earth. The panic that had been simmering in the scientific community finally boiled over. Leaks began to flood encrypted forums. A terrified scientist from the ESA claimed that the two halves were generating a colossal, shared magnetic field, an electromagnetic structure of planetary scale that linked them together. Another leak from a deep space research facility showed energy signatures emanating from the objects that looked eerily similar to those seen in the fractions of a second before a particle accelerator fires, but on a scale billions of times larger. In other words, the two pieces of 3I Atlas were not just aligning. They were powering up. They were forming a weapon, or a tool, of unimaginable power, with our world sitting directly in its crosshairs. And then, we began to feel it. At the exact moment the final alignment began, instruments on Earth registered the effect. Our planet's magnetic field, the invisible shield that protects us from solar radiation, began to fluctuate. The changes were subtle at first, small but measurable anomalies. Compasses in sensitive laboratories quivered. The accuracy of our global positioning system, GPS, began to degrade. There were even anecdotal but widespread reports of migratory birds becoming disoriented, changing their flight paths mid-journey across entire continents. It was as if something huge and distant had reached out and touched the very edge of our world's protective energy field. A ripple on the invisible ocean of space, a warning tremor before the main earthquake. As of this moment, the connection between the two halves of Atlas is still tightening. The alignment is becoming more and more precise. The energy signatures are growing stronger. A single, terrifying question now echoes in every laboratory, every observatory, and every sleepless government office from Washington to Beijing. What happens when the alignment is complete? What happens when they finally turn it on? We have spent our entire existence looking up at the stars in wonder. We never stop to consider that one day the stars might be looking back. And now, they're not just looking. They're aiming. As the two halves of Atlas complete their final silent maneuver, we are left suspended in a moment of terrifying clarity. The story of 3I Atlas, whether a fiction to entertain or a chilling premonition, forces us to confront the profound fragility of our own understanding. For centuries, we have built our world on a foundation of rules we believed were immutable. But this event teaches us our first, and perhaps most important, lesson: humility in the face of the unknown. We are not the masters of the universe. We are barely toddlers who have just learned to walk, taking our first steps into a cosmos that is infinitely more complex and potentially more dangerous than we ever imagined. The universe does not owe us an explanation, and our rulebook may just be the first chapter of a library we never knew existed. How often in our own lives do we act with absolute certainty, convinced we know all the facts, only to be humbled by a new perspective or an unforeseen event? Atlas reminds us to stay curious, to keep questioning, and to always leave room for the possibility that we are wrong. The second lesson is about communication and intent. The object didn't arrive with guns blazing. It used camouflage, precision, and signals we could just barely comprehend. It sent a message in the universal language of mathematics, a gesture that could be interpreted as either a greeting or a declaration of superiority. It reminds us that communication is not just about words. It's about the actions that surround them. In our daily lives, how do we announce our presence? Do we enter a room with chaos and noise, or with quiet purpose? Do we seek to understand before we seek to be understood? The actions of Atlas, so precise and deliberate, force us to reflect on our own intentions and how we project them onto the world. Finally, this story is a powerful allegory for unity in the face of an existential threat. When the anomaly appeared, the scientists of the world, from different nations, cultures, and political systems, all worked together. They shared data. They debated theories. They united against a common mystery. The threat, as terrifying as it is, erased the petty borders we draw on our maps. It is a stark reminder that in the grand scheme of things, we are all crewmates on a tiny, fragile vessel adrift in an endless ocean. The challenges that will truly define our future, whether they come from the stars or from our own actions here on Earth, will demand that we see beyond our differences and recognize our shared humanity. As we stand here now, watching and waiting, I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder. If you were in that control room watching those screens, what would you be feeling? Hope? Terror? Awe? What do you believe the ultimate purpose of this cosmic machine is? Is it a weapon? A gateway? A message in a bottle from a civilization so advanced we are like ants examining a microchip? And most importantly, what does an event like this say about our own place in the universe? I want you to think about these things. Let them expand your perspective beyond the daily grind. Look up at the night sky tonight and remember that it is not empty. It is just quiet. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. Your curiosity and your willingness to explore these profound mysteries are what keep this search for knowledge alive. I hope this story has not only thrilled you, but has also given you a new lens through which to view our world and our future. If you were captivated by the story of 3i Atlas and want to continue exploring the biggest questions in the cosmos, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. I truly want to hear your thoughts on what happens next. Your support is what fuels these explorations into the unknown. We'll see you in the next video.